It's strange how you never really notice the cracks in a mirror until you're staring at them long enough. That's how I describe my marriage to Melissa. From the outside, we were the perfect family. A nice suburban home, 2 cars in the driveway, and a 10-year-old son, Adam, who had the same quirky sense of humor as his mom. It was a picturesque life, one that I thought I'd earned through years of hard work and sacrifice. Melissa, my wife of 12 years, was the kind of woman who lit up a room. She was smart, funny, and had this effortless way of making people feel seen. Her career as a marketing executive had taken off in the past few years, and while I was proud of her accomplishments, it meant I saw her less and less. Meanwhile, I ran my own small construction company, working long hours myself, but always trying to carve out time for Adam. He and I shared a love for old superhero movies, building model rockets, and sneaking out for ice cream runs when Melissa wasn't paying attention. Despite the busyness of life, I always thought Melissa and I were solid. Sure, we had our disagreements. Every couple does. But we knew how to laugh together, how to support each other through the tough times. Or at least, that's what I believed. Lately, though, things had felt off. Melissa had grown more distant. She was constantly glued to her phone, and when I'd ask about her day, her answers were short, distracted. At first, I chalked it up to stress. Her work had been demanding lately, with long hours and the occasional weekend trip. But in the back of my mind, a small, unwelcome thought began to fester. What if there was more to it than just work? I hated myself for even thinking it. Melissa wasn't just my wife. She was my best friend, the person I trusted above all others. I dismissed the doubts, telling myself that I was being paranoid. After all, we had built a life together. We had Adam. Surely that meant something. That evening, as I sat in the living room watching TV with Adam, I glanced over at Melissa, who was seated at the dining table, typing away on her laptop. She looked beautiful, the glow of the screen illuminating her face. I smiled to myself, thinking how lucky I was to have her. "Dad, can we watch another episode?" Adam's voice broke through my thoughts. "Sure, buddy," I said, ruffling his hair. Melissa looked up briefly, giving us a faint smile before returning to her work. It was such a small, ordinary moment, one that felt so secure, so normal. Little did I know, it would be one of the last times our family would feel that way. It was around 2 weeks after that quiet evening in the living room when I started to notice the little changes in Melissa more clearly. At first, they were easy to dismiss. She'd come home later than usual, brushing off my questions with explanations about last-minute meetings or client dinners. She'd keep her phone closer to her, always angled away, and suddenly had a new lock screen I didn't recognize. I tried not to let it bother me. It was a busy time for both of us, and I didn't want to start nitpicking. Melissa had always been fiercely independent, something I loved about her. But as the days passed, her distance became more pronounced. Our conversations grew shorter, and her once warm laughter seemed strained. It was like I was living with a stranger wearing my wife's face. Adam noticed it too, though he didn't say much. He'd ask why Mom wasn't home for dinner or why she seemed so tired. I'd make excuses for her, assuring him she was just busy and reminding him how hard she worked for our family. It wasn't a lie, not exactly. At least, that's what I told myself. But even I couldn't ignore the small inconsistencies. One night, I came home early from a client meeting to find her sitting on the couch, staring blankly at her phone. When she realized I was there, she quickly locked it and smiled at me. A tight, uncomfortable smile that felt more like an apology than a greeting. "How was your meeting?" she asked, tucking her phone into the couch cushions. "Good," I said, watching her carefully. "What about you? How was your day?" "Oh, busy as usual. You know how it is," she replied, standing up and heading toward the kitchen. She didn't elaborate, and I didn't push. But the conversation sat heavy in my mind long after she'd gone to bed. I started to wonder if I was being ridiculous. Maybe she really was just overwhelmed with work. But then why was she so evasive? Why was there this growing chasm between us, one I couldn't seem to cross no matter how hard I tried? One evening, Adam and I were sitting at the dining table working on his homework when Melissa's phone buzzed on the counter. She was in the shower, and the screen lit up with a notification. I glanced at it out of instinct, and my heart froze. It was a message preview from someone named Chris that read, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Miss you." I stared at the phone, my pulse quickening. Chris? I didn't know any Chris. Was it a coworker? A friend? Was it innocent? I told myself it had to be. Melissa would never. Would she? The sound of the water turning off snapped me out of my daze. I quickly returned to the table, trying to focus on Adam's homework, but my mind was spinning. When Melissa came downstairs, I studied her carefully, searching for answers in her body language, her expression. But she just kissed Adam on the head, smiled at me, and went to make herself a cup of tea as if everything was perfectly normal. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. I wanted to confront her, to ask her about the message, but I didn't know how to do it without sounding accusatory. And what if I was wrong? What if I let my insecurities sabotage our marriage? For the first time in years, I felt truly uncertain about my place in her life. Something was changing between us, something I couldn't quite put my finger on, and it terrified me. The days that followed were a haze of doubt and self-questioning. I couldn't get the message from Chris out of my mind. Was it just an innocent text between coworkers? Or was it something more? I wanted to believe the best about Melissa. This was the woman I'd shared my life with for over a decade. The idea of her betraying me seemed absurd. And yet, the doubt gnawed at me. I tried to keep myself busy. Work was always a reliable distraction, and Adam had a soccer game that Saturday. For a few hours, I felt like my old self again, cheering him on from the sidelines and joking with the other parents. But even in those moments, I'd catch myself drifting, wondering if Melissa was really working late, or if there was something else going on. That night, while Melissa was upstairs taking another one of her long showers, I decided I couldn't just sit in silence anymore. I needed clarity, even if it was uncomfortable. I picked up her phone, which she'd left on the kitchen counter, and stared at the lock screen. The passcode had been changed. My heart sank. Melissa and I had always been open with each other when it came to our phones. We'd shared passcodes without hesitation, not out of suspicion, but because we had nothing to hide. So why had she suddenly felt the need to lock me out? I set the phone down, my hands shaking. There was a voice in my head telling me I was crossing a line, that snooping would only lead to more problems. But there was another voice, louder, urging me to find out the truth before it was too late. When Melissa came back downstairs, I tried to act casual, pretending to be engrossed in the football highlights on TV. She sat down next to me, her hair damp and smelling of lavender, and smiled. "How was the game?" she asked, her tone light and cheerful. "Good. Adam played well," I said, keeping my eyes on the screen. "You should come next time." "I will," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Work's just been so crazy lately." We sat in silence for a while, the flicker of the TV casting shadows across the room. I wanted to ask her about Chris, about the passcode, about everything that had been bothering me, but the words wouldn't come. What if I was wrong? What if I accused her of something she hadn't done? The thought of losing her, of tearing our family apart over a misunderstanding, was unbearable. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself retreating further into my own thoughts. I began noticing more little things. The way she'd rush to silence her phone when it buzzed, the new perfume she'd started wearing, the nights she'd come home smelling like wine when she claimed she'd been working late. I wanted to believe it was all in my head, that I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Melissa was pulling away from me, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't seem to reach her. The worst part was not knowing. The uncertainty was like a weight on my chest, suffocating me. I found myself imagining the worst-case scenarios, torturing myself with images of her with someone else. But then there were moments, brief, fleeting moments, when she'd smile at me the way she used to, or laugh at one of Adam's jokes, and I'd think maybe, just maybe, I was imagining it all. Maybe the Melissa I knew and loved was still there, and I just needed to find a way to bring her back. I didn't know it then, but the answers I was looking for would come sooner than I expected. And when they did, they would shatter everything I thought I knew about my wife and my marriage. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the dam finally broke. Melissa had left work early, claiming she wasn't feeling well, and I'd come home a little later to check on her. Her car was in the driveway, and the house was eerily quiet when I walked in. Melissa? I called out, setting my keys on the counter. No answer. I stepped into the living room and saw her laptop on the coffee table, the screen dim but still on. My stomach twisted. She never left her laptop unattended when she was working, especially not during the day. Melissa? I tried again, this time louder. There was still no response. The house felt heavy, like the air had been sucked out. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I headed toward the stairs, my heart pounding as I climbed. When I reached the top, I noticed Adam's door was shut, and faint music was playing from inside. I knocked softly, and his voice called out, "Come in." "Hey, buddy," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. "Where's your mom?" Adam was sitting on his bed with his headphones around his neck. He looked up at me, his expression uncertain. "I think she's in your room," he said after a pause. I nodded and walked toward our bedroom, my footsteps slowing as I approached. The door was slightly ajar, and I could hear muffled voices on the other side. My chest tightened as I pushed the door open just enough to peek inside. And that's when I saw them. Melissa was standing by the bed, her hand resting on the arm of a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, dressed in a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and he was leaning toward her, his voice low and intimate. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but the way Melissa looked at him, her eyes soft, her lips curved into a faint smile, told me everything I needed to know. I froze, my mind racing. Who was he? How long had this been going on? Why in our home? My pulse roared in my ears as a wave of disbelief and rage surged through me. I wanted to storm in and demand answers, to rip this man out of my house and away from my wife. But before I could do anything, Adam's voice broke through the fog in my head. "Dad?" I turned sharply to see him standing behind me in the hallway, his headphones in one hand and his expression confused. He must have followed me when I left his room. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. I glanced back at the partially open door, panic flooding my system. I didn't want Adam to see. I couldn't let him see. I stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind me as quietly as I could. "Nothing, buddy," I said, trying to steady my voice. "Mom's busy. Let's go downstairs." He hesitated, his brow furrowed. "Are you okay, Dad? You look weird." "I'm fine," I lied, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Come on. Let's make some popcorn and watch a movie." Adam followed me reluctantly, casting a glance over his shoulder as we descended the stairs. I could feel his confusion, his unspoken questions, but I couldn't focus on that. My thoughts were spiraling, each one worse than the last. In that moment, I made a decision. I needed to know the truth, but I couldn't let Adam get caught in the crossfire. Whatever was happening between Melissa and this man, I had to protect my son from it. For now, I would keep quiet, bide my time, and figure out what to do next. But deep down, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and uneasy silence. Adam and I sat on the couch, the sound of an animated movie filling the room, but I barely registered any of it. My mind was trapped in an endless loop, replaying the scene in the bedroom. Every detail haunted me. The tilt of Melissa's head, the way her hand lingered on his arm. Melissa eventually came downstairs, her expression calm, as though nothing had happened. She smiled at Adam and sat on the opposite end of the couch, avoiding my gaze. She asked him about his day, her voice light and cheerful, but I could hear the edge of something beneath it. Was it guilt? Or had she simply perfected the art of hiding? "Everything okay?" she asked me at one point, her tone casual but her eyes searching mine. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Just tired from work." She nodded, seemingly satisfied, and turned her attention back to the TV. I couldn't decide if I was relieved or furious at how easily she dismissed my unease. Did she think I hadn't noticed? Or was she so secure in her secrecy that she didn't care? That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed beside Melissa, listening to her breathing as my thoughts churned. Every instinct in me screamed to confront her, to demand an explanation, but I hesitated. I didn't have a plan. What would I say? What would she say? And what would it do to Adam if our world imploded overnight? The next morning, I watched her closely as she got ready for work. She hummed to herself while fixing her hair, her movements as graceful and unbothered as always. It was like looking at a stranger. I wanted to scream at her, to ask how she could betray me like this, but instead, I swallowed my anger and pretended everything was fine. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched cup of coffee in front of me. My hands trembled as I scrolled through my phone, looking up advice on what to do when you suspect your spouse is cheating. Every article said the same thing: gather evidence. Don't jump to conclusions. Be prepared for what comes next. I decided to follow that advice, even though it made me feel sick. If Melissa was having an affair, I needed to know for certain before I confronted her. I couldn't risk a misunderstanding or a hasty accusation that might backfire. So I resolved to watch and wait, no matter how painful it was. Over the next few days, I began to notice patterns I hadn't paid attention to before. Melissa's late meetings lined up suspiciously with times she'd stop replying to my texts. Her phone, once left on the counter or in the living room, was now always within arm's reach. And then there were the small, almost imperceptible changes in her behavior. The way she avoided eye contact, the way her laughter sounded hollow when we talked. The most damning clue came on a Friday night. Melissa was sitting on the couch, her laptop open, while Adam and I played cards at the dining table. Her phone buzzed, and she picked it up quickly, her lips curving into a faint smile. She typed a quick response, then glanced over at me. When she saw me watching her, her smile faltered, and she tucked the phone into her pocket. It was Chris. I knew it without even needing to see the screen. And in that moment, I felt something inside me snap. I couldn't live like this anymore, tiptoeing around the truth, pretending not to notice the cracks in our marriage. But I couldn't confront her yet, not without proof. I owed it to myself, and to Adam, to be sure. So I made a decision. I would start documenting everything. If Melissa was betraying me, I would find out. And when I did, I would make sure she could never deny it. Over the next week, I felt like a detective in my own home. Every interaction with Melissa became a puzzle piece, every moment a potential clue. I started keeping a notebook, writing down times she claimed to be working late, the excuses she gave for her sudden outings, and the moments when her phone seemed to be the most active. It felt invasive, but I told myself it was necessary. I wasn't just protecting myself, I was protecting Adam. I also installed a small camera in the living room. I hated doing it, hated what it said about my trust in her, but I needed to know. The idea of her betraying me in our home, the place we built together, was unbearable. If it was happening, I had to see it with my own eyes. It didn't take long for my suspicions to be confirmed. It was a Thursday afternoon. I had told Melissa I'd be working late, but instead, I parked my truck a few streets over and waited. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe that nothing would happen and I'd feel like an idiot for doubting her. But when a silver sedan pulled into the driveway, my heart sank. I recognized the man from the bedroom, Chris. He got out of the car, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt like he was heading into a business meeting, and walked up to the front door. Melissa opened it almost immediately, stepping aside to let him in. She glanced outside once, her eyes scanning the street, before closing the door behind him. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, my body frozen as if in shock. I wanted to storm in, to rip that door off its hinges and confront them both, but I couldn't bring myself to move. All I could think about was Adam. He was at home. Our son was in the house. How could she do this with him there? I forced myself to stay calm and waited for Chris to leave. Nearly an hour passed before the door opened again, and I watched as Melissa kissed him on the cheek before he walked back to his car. He didn't seem rushed or guilty. He looked comfortable, like this was just another routine visit. I waited until his car disappeared down the street before heading back to the house. My hands were trembling as I parked in the driveway, my heart pounding with anger and disbelief. I opened the door slowly, stepping inside to find Adam sitting on the couch, a video game controller in his hands. "Hey, Dad," he said, glancing up briefly. "You're home early." "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where's your mom?" "In her room, I think," he replied, his attention already back on the game. I nodded and walked down the hallway, pausing outside the bedroom door. It was ajar, and I could see Melissa sitting on the bed, scrolling through her phone. She looked up when she heard me, her expression neutral. "Hey," she said casually. "You're back early." I stared at her for a moment, the words caught in my throat. I wanted to confront her right then and there, to ask how she could do this to me, to Adam. But instead, I simply nodded. "Yeah, the meeting got canceled," I said, my voice tight. "Thought I'd come home and spend some time with Adam." She smiled faintly, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. "That's nice. He was asking about you earlier." I stood there for a moment longer, watching her, before turning and walking away. My chest felt heavy, my mind racing. I had the proof I needed now. There was no more denying it, no more pretending things were fine. Melissa was cheating on me, and she brought it into our home. The question now was what to do about it, and how to protect Adam from the fallout. The next morning, I woke up with the weight of the previous day pressing down on my chest like a boulder. I barely slept, my mind running through endless scenarios. I knew I couldn't ignore what I'd seen any longer. Confrontation was inevitable, but I still hadn't figured out how, or when, I would do it. For now, I was trying to hold it together for Adam's sake. It was a Saturday, and Melissa was in the kitchen making coffee while Adam and I sat at the dining table finishing breakfast. She seemed cheerful, humming a tune as if everything was perfectly normal. It made me sick to watch her act like the loving wife and mother, knowing what she'd done just the day before. I could barely get through breakfast, so I excused myself to the living room, pretending to sort through some mail. I didn't see it happen, but at some point, Adam wandered into the kitchen. Moments later, his voice broke the quiet. "Who's Chris?" The words were like a gunshot. My entire body tensed, and I felt the blood drain from my face. "Chris." Melissa's voice echoed back, her tone too light, too casual. "Why do you ask, sweetie?" "There was a text on your phone," Adam said, his voice matter of fact. "It said, 'Last night was amazing.'" The silence that followed was deafening. I stood frozen in the living room, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they could hear it. I could picture the scene perfectly, Melissa standing there, trying to come up with a response, while Adam waited, completely unaware of the storm he'd just unleashed. "Oh, Melissa finally stammered, her voice wavering. "That's just a friend from work. We were talking about a project." "Really?" Adam asked, his voice tinged with curiosity. It didn't sound like that. I couldn't stay silent any longer. I walked into the kitchen, my movements slow and deliberate, as Melissa turned to face me. Her eyes widened when she saw me, and for a split second, I saw something flash across her face. Panic. "Adam," I said gently, keeping my voice calm despite the rage bubbling beneath the surface. "Why don't you go upstairs for a bit?" He looked between us, clearly sensing the tension. Did I do something wrong? "No, buddy," I assured him. "You didn't do anything wrong. I just need to talk to Mom for a minute." Adam hesitated, but eventually nodded, grabbing his cereal bowl and heading up the stairs. Melissa and I stood in silence until we heard his door close. I turned to face her fully, my expression blank but my eyes burning with anger. "Do you want to explain that?" She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She looked at me like a deer caught in headlights, her usual composure shattered. I waited, my arms crossed, as the seconds dragged on. "It's not what you think," she finally said, her voice trembling. "Really?" I replied, my tone sharp. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what I think." She shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. "It's nothing serious. I swear." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and foreign in the quiet kitchen. "Nothing serious? Melissa, you're bringing this man into our home, into the home we share with our son, and you want me to believe it's nothing?" She looked away, wiping at her eyes. "It just happened. I didn't mean for any of this." "Stop," I snapped, my voice cutting through her excuses. "I don't want to hear how it just happened. I want to know how long it's been going on. How long have you been lying to me? To Adam?" Her lips quivered, and for a moment, I thought she wouldn't answer. But then she whispered, "A few months." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Months. All that time, I'd been second-guessing myself, convincing myself I was imagining things, while she'd been carrying on behind my back. "I'm done," I said, my voice low but firm. "You've made your choice, Melissa. Now you're going to have to live with it." Before she could respond, I turned and walked out of the kitchen, my hands trembling. I didn't know how I was going to tell Adam the truth, or even if I could. But one thing was clear. My marriage was over. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I could barely focus on anything, my mind a swirling mess of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. Melissa stayed in the bedroom for most of the afternoon, her door shut tightly. Adam, sensing the tension in the house, kept to his room as well, playing video games or reading comic books. I busied myself with chores to avoid breaking down. Folding laundry, organizing the garage, anything to keep my hands moving and my mind from spiraling. But no amount of busy work could dull the ache in my chest. I kept replaying Melissa's words in my head. A few months. How had I missed the signs for so long? And what had this betrayal done to Adam, even if he didn't fully understand it yet? It was around dinner time when Adam came downstairs. He looked hesitant, lingering in the doorway of the living room while I sat on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. "Dad," he said softly. I turned to him, forcing a smile. "Hey, buddy. What's up? Are you and Mom fighting?" he asked, his small voice carrying the weight of his concern. I hesitated, unsure how to answer. Adam was only 10, but he was smart, too smart to brush this off with a simple "everything's fine." He'd seen and heard too much already. "We're having a disagreement," I said carefully. "But don't worry about it, okay? It's something we'll figure out." Adam didn't seem convinced. He walked over and sat beside me, his hands fidgeting with the hem of his t-shirt. After a moment, he looked up at me, his brow furrowed. "Is it because of Chris?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. My stomach dropped. I stared at him, my heart pounding. "What makes you say that?" "I saw him here," Adam said, his eyes wide and unblinking. "He came over when you weren't home. Mom said he was her friend from work, but," he trailed off, biting his lip. I leaned forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Adam, I need you to be honest with me. Did you see anything else? Did something happen?" He hesitated, looking down at his lap. "I saw them hugging," he admitted, "in the kitchen, and kissing." The words hit me like a freight train. My worst fears had come true. Not only had Melissa brought her affair into our home, but Adam had been there to witness it. My hands clenched into fists at my sides as I fought to keep my emotions in check. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked gently. Adam shrugged, his voice shaky. "I didn't know if I should. I thought maybe it wasn't a big deal, but now, you and Mom are mad and I don't know what to do." I pulled him into a hug, holding him tightly as tears stung my eyes. "You didn't do anything wrong, buddy. I'm so sorry you had to see that. None of this is your fault, okay?" He nodded against my chest, and I could feel his small frame trembling. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I couldn't fall apart now, not in front of him. He needed me to be strong. "We're going to be okay," I said, my voice firm. "No matter what happens, I'm here for you. Always." Adam pulled back, his face serious. "Does this mean you and Mom are going to split up?" I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But whatever happens, I promise I'll make sure you're taken care of. That's what matters most." He nodded, though I could see the worry in his eyes. I wanted to shield him from all of this, to protect his innocence, but the damage had already been done. Now, all I could do was make sure he knew he wasn't alone. Later that night, after Adam had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the photo of our family on the mantel. It was taken just last year, during a vacation to the mountains. We looked so happy, so whole. It felt like another life entirely. I knew I couldn't delay any longer. Melissa's actions had crossed every line. I had to confront her and make the decision I'd been avoiding. For Adam's sake, and for mine. The house was quiet when I walked up to the bedroom that night. Melissa's door was shut, the light spilling out from the gap underneath. I stood there for a moment, gathering my thoughts, steadying my breath. Every fiber of my being wanted to kick the door in and let the anger pour out, but I knew that wouldn't solve anything. Instead, I knocked once and pushed the door open. Melissa was sitting on the bed, scrolling through her phone. When she saw me, her face immediately stiffened, the color draining from her cheeks. She must have sensed what was coming. "We need to talk," I said, closing the door behind me. She set her phone down slowly, her hands shaking just enough for me to notice. "About what?" "Don't do that," I said, my voice low but sharp. "Don't play dumb." Adam saw Chris. Her eyes widened, and for a second, I thought she might deny it. But instead, she let out a shaky breath, her shoulders sagging. "I didn't think he would." "No, you didn't think," I snapped, cutting her off. "You brought that man into our home, Melissa. Our home. While our son was here. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't about to let her use them as a shield. I stepped closer, my anger boiling over. "You lied to me. You lied to him. And now he's the one caught in the middle of this mess." "I didn't mean for him to see anything," she said, her voice barely audible. I thought I could keep it separate." "Separate?" I barked out a bitter laugh. "Melissa, there is no separate. You don't get to compartmentalize your affair while pretending everything's fine at home. That's not how this works." She wiped at her face, her tears falling freely now. "I'm sorry. I made a mistake." "A mistake?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You've been seeing him for months, Melissa. This isn't some drunken one-night stand. This is deliberate. Calculated. You knew exactly what you were doing, and you did it anyway." She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I swear. I didn't want to hurt you or Adam." "Well, congratulations," I said coldly, "because you've done exactly that." The room fell into a heavy silence, her sobs the only sound. I turned away, running a hand through my hair as I tried to calm myself. My thoughts were a chaotic mess, but one thing was crystal clear. This marriage was over. "I want you to leave," I said finally, my voice steady but firm. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "What?" "You heard me," I said. "Pack your things and go. I don't care where you go. Your sister's, a hotel, Chris's place, but you're not staying here." "Please, let's just talk about this," she pleaded, reaching for me. "We can fix this. I'll cut it off with him. I'll do anything." I stepped back, avoiding her touch. "It's too late for that. You made your choice, Melissa. Now you have to live with it." Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't waver. I couldn't. Not after what she'd done. This wasn't just about me. It was about Adam. He deserved better than this chaos, this betrayal. I wouldn't let her drag him through it any longer. "You have until tomorrow to pack," I said, turning toward the door. "I'll explain things to Adam, but you need to be gone by the time he wakes up." I didn't wait for her response. I walked out of the room, closing the door behind me. As I stood in the hallway, the weight of what had just happened crashed down on me, leaving me breathless. I'd lost my wife, but I still had my son, and I would do everything in my power to make sure he never felt this pain again. The next morning was one of the heaviest I've ever lived through. I didn't sleep at all that night. Instead, I sat in the living room, staring at nothing, listening for sounds upstairs as Melissa moved around, packing her things. Every now and then, I'd hear a muffled sob or the creak of the floorboards. It should have made me feel something: anger, sadness, regret, but I was numb. By the time Adam woke up, Melissa was almost finished. I heard his bedroom door open and his small footsteps padding down the stairs. He found me on the couch, clutching a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. "Morning, Dad," he said, his voice soft. He looked at me for a moment, then tilted his head. "Is Mom okay?" I heard her crying. I took a deep breath and set the coffee cup down. "Come here, bud," I said, patting the cushion next to me. Adam sat down, his big brown eyes full of questions. I didn't want to break his heart, but I owed him the truth, or as much of it as he could handle. "Mom and I had a talk last night," I began carefully, "and we decided that she's going to stay somewhere else for a while." He blinked, the confusion on his face deepening. "Why? Did you guys have a fight?" "It's complicated," I said, searching for the right words. Sometimes, adults make choices that hurt the people they love. And when that happens, it's better for everyone to take some time apart. Is it because of Chris? Adam asked quietly. The mention of that name sent a pang of anger through me, but I pushed it aside. Yeah, I admitted. It is. Adam frowned, his little hands fidgeting in his lap. I don't get it. Why would she do that? Doesn't she love us? I felt my throat tighten, but I forced myself to stay calm. I think she does, in her own way. But sometimes, people make mistakes, and those mistakes have consequences. He didn't say anything for a moment, just stared at his hands. Is she coming back? He finally asked. I hesitated, the weight of the question pressing down on me. I don't know, I said honestly. But no matter what happens, you and I are going to be okay. I promise. Adam nodded, but I could see the tears welling up in his eyes. He leaned into me, and I wrapped my arms around him, holding him tightly as he cried. My own tears threatened to spill over, but I held them back. This moment wasn't about me, it was about him. A little while later, Melissa came downstairs, her suitcase in hand. She paused at the bottom of the stairs, her eyes puffy and red. Adam turned to look at her, his face streaked with tears. I'm so sorry, sweetheart, she said, her voice trembling. I love you so much. Adam didn't respond. He just clung to me, his small body pressed against mine. Melissa's lip quivered, and she looked at me, silently pleading for something. Forgiveness, understanding, anything. But I had nothing to give her. I'll call to check in, she said softly. Whenever it's okay. I nodded once, a stiff, mechanical motion. She lingered for a moment longer, then opened the door and stepped outside. I watched as she loaded her suitcase into her car and drove away, the sound of the engine fading into the distance. The house felt impossibly quiet after she left. I sat with Adam on the couch, holding him close as he sniffled into my shirt. My heart ached for him, for the loss he didn't fully understand yet, but I knew we'd get through it together. In that moment, I made a vow to myself. I would rebuild our lives, piece by piece, no matter how long it took. Melissa may have broken my heart, but she hadn't broken me. And as long as I had Adam, I still had something worth fighting for. The days that followed were some of the hardest I'd ever faced. The house felt empty without Melissa, the routines we'd built together now disjointed. The silence was deafening, and every corner of the home carried memories that stung like an open wound. But I couldn't dwell in that pain, not with Adam depending on me. I threw myself into being the best father I could be. Every morning, I made sure Adam had a hot breakfast, packed his lunch, and walked him to the bus stop. Every evening, I helped him with homework, played his favorite video games, and tucked him in with a story. I wanted him to know, without a shadow of a doubt, that I was here for him, that I always would be. Melissa called a few times, but I kept our conversations short and focused solely on Adam. She asked to see him, and I agreed, setting up visits on the weekends. As much as I resented her for what she'd done, I didn't want to keep Adam from his mother. I knew he still loved her, even if he didn't fully understand what had happened. One evening, about 2 weeks after Melissa had left, Adam surprised me. We were sitting on the couch, watching one of his favorite superhero movies, when he turned to me and said, I'm glad it's just us now. His words caught me off guard. What do you mean, buddy? I asked. He shrugged, looking down at his lap. It's quieter. No more fighting. And you're here more. It feels better. I felt a lump form in my throat. I'm sorry you had to go through all of this, I said, but I'm glad you feel safe. That's all I want for you. He smiled at me, a small, genuine smile that gave me hope. Maybe this wouldn't break him. Maybe, together, we could find a way to heal. As time passed, I began to see a therapist, someone to help me process the anger and grief I'd been carrying. Talking about the betrayal, the guilt, and the sadness helped me see things more clearly. I realized that while Melissa's actions had shattered our marriage, they didn't define who I was, or what my future could be. I also started making changes to the house. Small things at first, rearranging the furniture, repainting the walls. But as the months went on, I began to see these changes as a way to reclaim my space, to turn it into a home that felt like mine and Adam's. A fresh start. Melissa and I finalized the divorce 6 months later. It was as amicable as a divorce could be, but the pain of signing those papers, of officially ending the life we'd built together, was undeniable. She tried to apologize again, to explain herself, but I stopped her. There was no point in rehashing the past. All I wanted was to move forward. The following summer, Adam and I took a road trip to the mountains, a place we loved as a family but had avoided since everything fell apart. We spent the week hiking, fishing, and stargazing, creating new memories to replace the old ones. One night, as we sat by the campfire, Adam leaned his head against my shoulder. "Thanks for this, Dad," he said. "It's been the best summer ever." I smiled, my heart swelling with pride and gratitude. "Anything for you, kiddo." In that moment, I realized that while my life hadn't turned out the way I'd planned, it was still mine to rebuild. I'd lost a marriage, but I hadn't lost everything. I still had Adam. I still had hope. And I still had the strength to create a new future, one that was full of love, laughter, and peace. And for the first time in a long time, I believed we'd be okay. Did I do the right thing? Write your opinion in the comments.